Hello everyone. Today we have a special guest, Dr.Heroka K Yepthomi. He is the author of the book Everyday Life and Nationalist Credo, an ethnographic study of Naga identity. So today let us try to explore the meaning behind the Naga identity. Let us try to know the in-depth of Naga nationalisms and Naga identity. So sir, welcome to the channel, and it is a great honor to have you. Can you narrate a brief about the writing of your book, how it has become, and what push you, what make you to write a book on Naga nationalisms and about the Naga society?
Before that, I wanted to thank you for inviting me, and I want to say that it's a great pleasure to be here and part of your show. And I hope this engagement will be meaningful for both of us and for your viewer as well. Regarding my book, I actually started my book way back when I was doing my PhD. I realized that this issue is a very important part of the Naga societies. And when I went to fieldwork, I wasn't very sure about what I should be doing in my PhD and so on, and what kind of intellectual journey I should carry on. But as I go for a preliminary research, then I made up my mind that I should be doing something on the Naga identity and Naga nationalism and Naga issues, which I feel that it's a very pertinent matter, and this is a very important thing for each one of us, because this is something that I discover, or rather, found it that every Nagas, whether it is from the village or in the cities or whether political parties, and everybody is talking about it, but something, this is some kind of issues that isn't really we haven't really crystallized what this all about. So somewhere it is hanging. And therefore, I thought I will do some kind of research and to contribute something on this, on the debate. And that's where I made up my mind, and that's where I carried out as maybe a kind of part of my intellectual journey.
You have also mentioned about the Naga identity. So I just wanted to know, how do you perceive, or what is the notions, what is your opinions about Naganess? What makes a Naganess a Naga?
Yeah, that's actually an interesting question where I begin it. That's kind of question I ask to myself first, and that's where I begin. So the thing is, what makes a Naga, or that is a thing that something that we always try and find it out. But as I try to understand what that means, and I try to review hundreds of literatures written by the Nagas and the non-Nagas, I found out that the concept of Naga, or the ideas of Naga, is primarily on the high political conceptualizations of who are Nagas, what is Nagas, are only basically conceptualized at the level of high political level, rather than what is actually found in the ordinary everyday world. And that is precisely where I made up my mind to not only to shift away from these high political conceptualizations of Naga, and to look Nagas in their everyday life, in a sense, in their ordinary everyday life, in their taken for granted world, so that to see how Nagas are actually practiced, rather than just ideas, very good ideas, but to see how Nagas are actually practiced in the everyday life, in an ordinary way. So that's where the entry point of my this book, basically. And then, of course, different diversions and different dimensions of what these Nagas come to light as the process of going for a research.
This identity which we have talked about, the Naga identity, that Naganess, and these Naganess are seen only in the high-profile areas, but rather it is being neglected when it is refers to the common people. Yes. So identity of the Naganess can be preserved only with the establishment of a Naga nation?
When we talk about identity, what we are actually implying is every identity is a political construct. So identity is a political construct. In a sense, there can be different kinds of identities, identity from a personal to the group to family. Identities are multiple. But when we think about Naga identity in terms of its ethnicities and nationalism, that's the question, because that's the question where we try to deal with this in this book. So Naga as a nation, Naga as a nation, the idea of nation is typically a Western construct, whether we like it or not. I find that the idea of nation, some aspects of Naga identity is a sort of borrowed from the Western traditions, the idea of Naga traditions. Of course, there are Naga as a, constructed so-called tribes is one thing, as an ethnic groups, another thing. But all of this has certain historical and cultural and political context, So Naga as a nation, as historically speaking, emerged within the context of the British colonial interventions in the Naga Hills and other parts of Northeast. So the notion of Nagas started to enter along with the British and colonial writings. So Nagas were written by the colonials.
Okay.
We were written by the colonials as a Naga. So some scholars are, senior Naga scholars are also of opinion that the very idea called the Nagas itself is a colonial construct. Right. So, and these are things, And basically, if you go to the history of how the word Nagas emerged, we are still not very sure about where the word Naga comes from. There is always a conjecture that Nagas is related to the Borneos and Philippines and this and that. But there is no actual historical or cultural or scientific evidence to prove that we are coming from China or elsewhere as well. There must be true. There can be a true. But so all of these, in some sense, the colonial constructions as Nagas, that begin to write as an ethnic group, as a tribes, as so on and so on. And that's how we begin to identify ourselves as a group, as a people who comes together because of our similarities in culture, similarities in our language, in even our race. Of course, the word race has become a very bad word after the Nazi regime. But the race, racial, cultural, all of these, in some ways, similarities, and that's how we identify ourselves as a Nagas.
In the context of the Naga issues, since the Naga struggles and the Naga movement is mainly directed in preserving that Naganess or Naga identity, so in that context, do you believe or do you think that only through the formations of a nation can that identity be preserved, or within the notions of nation state that identity can be preserved?
When we talk about nation and identity, and the question that you're raising is that nation is not something that is, it's a permanent thing. Nation is as Ernest Renan says, nation is a daily plebiscite. That we have to, invoke nation all the time in order for the nation to be a nation. Because nation is not something that is permanent thing, unless people invoke in it. Therefore, you see in a popular everyday life, you see the newspapers always talking about Naga. Yeah. The word Nagas, that is an assertion. That is one kind of assertions of a Naga identity. So unless there is an assertion of the Naga identity every day, in the everyday life, in the ordinary world, I think that nations can also be eroded. So, but it doesn't mean that there will be no nations without nation state. There is a nation within the nation state, and there is a nation without a nation state. So nation is not something that is not necessarily that it has to have a nation state. Okay, so that is something that we need to differentiate. Nation will always be there.
So that identity of the Nagas can be preserved within the state and remaining under the nations of a particular nation.
Yes.
It does not need a nations to preserve that identity. Okay.
Of course, the importance of a nation state to enforce that identity. No, there is a force identity, which is from the top-down approach. That the prime minister, for example, will make a certain rules, and everything becomes that kind of thing. So nation will always be there. Nation is something that can exist without a nation state.
So in the context of Indian nations and Naga nations, as of perceive us of the movement that is being in struggle, mainly to build a Naga nation. So in that context, in India we have a lot of unique ethnic culture, unique ethnic identity, and even in the north itself, we have numbers of ethnic tribe or tribals. So, in a broader context, in reference to India, will it be possible to preserve that Naga identity? And I think within India also offered a framework or structure to preserve that identity of the tribals, ethnic identity of the tribals.
Yes. See, when we think about a nation and identity, there is the scholars of nationalisms have broadly distinguishes two types of a nation broadly. Under that, there are, of course, this distinction is not a watertight compartment, but for us to understand, there are ethnic nation, and there is also something called the civic nation. When we think about India as a nation and the nation state, we realize that India prescribes a civic notion of nation state where everybody is equal. The constitutions of India is framed in that civic.
In that way.
Yeah, in that ways. And when we see the typical example of the ethnic nation is where there is one race, one culture, one race and language and so on and so on. Those nations are known as the ethnic nations. That a nation should be constituted by one racial groups or one linguistic group, one ethnic groups, or one cultural groups. That is the ethnic forms of nation. So that is one thing that we need to differentiate. But in the case of the Nagas, there is always the conceptualizations, and the thinkers and leaders of the Nagas have always slightly tilted towards the ethnic nations, ethno-nationalism, or sometimes it is called the ethno-nationalism, or ethnic nations, rather than we prescribe the civic nations. In the civic nations, you will find all kinds of this variety, many nations within a civic, but in the ethnic nations, you have only one forms of ethnic groups. So that's how we can make out where Naga's nationalism lies. The ideas of largely
that assertions of ethno-nationalisms are being manipulated by the higher political profile in order to fulfill their aspirations. How do you perceive that kinds of nationalisms?
When we think about the Naga nation and the Naga nationalism, one can say that one can even go to an extent of saying that the Nagas have not been a nation yet. That can be a very controversial stuff. But some can even go on to say that the Nagas are not a nation. Why? Because there is a divisions of people in various levels. Tribal, this, that. We have too many groups within, and they are in a way fighting each other in many ways. So that doesn't give us the sense of being a nation. Nation is something to do with emotion, feelings. That there is an emotional bond, closeness. There is a camaraderie. But this is something that is hampered. And perhaps this is true, even true and becoming even more true in the 21st centuries. because of the way in which the neoliberal ideas, global ideas or globalization ideas getting into the Naga problems. For example, now we have begun to use the word, say, for example, like, stakeholders. That is
Stakeholders, yes.
That is a typical
Yes,
example of
yeah.
neoliberal ideas. That implies that Naga's nationalism is somewhat, it implies money
Yeah.
involves in it, stakeholders
Yes.
and neoliberal ideas. Somehow Naga nationalism is being reduced to the money thing. So the word stakeholders is typically of neoliberal ideas. And that in some ways getting into the Naga issues today, and that is in a way diluting the very core issue that Naga identity was. Earlier, it was Naga identity was all about identity. The identity was the first thing. It was not about economic, it was not about social, but it was more or less it was purely a political thing. The political, in a sense, it was an identity. And today we see that Naga's nationalism is now turning towards economic dimensions. And so these neoliberal ideas getting into it, and now we have started to use all those words that I have said, the stakeholders. So this is now diluting. And the entire apparatus of what is known as the opinion shapers, opinion shapers are into that. In a way, they are backing to that. So any kinds of alternatives is not possible. So Naga nationalism has that various dynamic over a period of history. So there is a huge changes. There is a huge changes that have gone. I cannot say that it is a positive or negative changes, but certainly there is a changes that has gone through from the Simon Commission's 1918 to the formation of NNC in 1946, 47, the 9-point agreements, then the 16-point agreements, and a series of agreements after the 9-point agreements. You will see that there is a change of consciousness among the Nagas. Obviously there is changes. Initially, what I observe is that Naga nationalism or the nationalist questions were primarily a cultural kind of questions that was taking place.
Okay.
But in the 80s somewhere, Naga nationalism, by mid-60s to 70s, the Naga nationalism started taking the turn of political connotations to it. So by 80s, 90s, you'll see that there is a political interventions or a political turn.
Shift from culture to politics.
From cultural nationalism to political kind of nationalism. It started to change. So that is one way in which the consciousness have also changed, because ideas is a very important thing. And in all of this historical shift, there is also a consciousness of shift of consciousness, a kind of paradigm shift. The issues, the discourses that went through these historical times, this time and space, this span of time,
So
is where this changes has occurred.
do these new generations, like today we are referring as Z generations or Z generations,
yes.
do they have that same consciousness about Naga nationalism?
Before I answered that, we have made a distinction between the culture and political. Of course, that distinctions is not a hard and fast distinctions. But what I'm saying is the emphasis on which that is, the emphasis is that. But of course, there is always an overlapping of culture and political, because culture means political and political culture. So there is it. So after this, what you call it, Generation Z or Generation Z, of course, there is a dramatic change in this group of people, because they have not experiences what went through in the older generations.
Yes.
There is an opinion differences between the younger generation, older generation, because the older generations, they didn't just experience, but they lived that experience.
They lived the experience. Yes.
But these generations, they have never lived that experience. They don't know what it means.
Yeah.
They don't know what is going on. therefore they won't very understand, for example, like AFSPA, they will never understand what it
Yes,
means
yes,
and
yes.
where it come from and what it implies. But so the people in after 1958, people since 58 and entire 60s, 70s and till 90s, we see that there is a brutal
Yeah.
Indian state nationalism. India is trying to force the Nagas to be a part of
Part
the
of
Indian nation.
India, yes.
So there is a force nationalism going on, using a brute force like and human right violations, these draconian laws using. So this is something that the young generation will never know and they will never understand. But the older generation do knows it. So
How can that idea of Naga nations or the idea of Naga identity can be instilled in the new generations?
it's just simply political educations
Okay.
about the Naga nationalism. That's important. Political educations in a sense, learning about the history of the
Yeah.
Nagas.
Yeah.
In the Indian university discourses, Naga discourses is missing.
Yes,
For
yes,
example.
exactly.
It's
Yeah.
completely out.
Yes.
Not only Nagas, but
If it
even
is
Indian
if it is
Nagas.
included, then it is
Yeah.
it's all about some cultures and tradition.
Yes, tradition,
Yeah.
cultures,
Yeah.
and so on and so on.
But not the political. But
Yeah, not a political part. It's like drinking coffee without caffeine.
Yes,
So that's
yeah.
if you are drinking coffee, then we should also drink
Yeah.
caffeine. No,
Yes,
you
yes,
can't
yes.
do that. So
Yes.
that kind of thing. You
Yeah.
want a good side of it, but bad side of it, you just leave it out.
yeah,
So
a
that's-
tea without sugar.
Tea
Yeah.
without sugar is kind of censoring what to teach and what not to teach,
Yes,
kind of
yes,
thing. It's not that. How can you do that? No.
But as being within the Indian government, that is not possible, I guess. The political discourses, that is not possible, I guess. But
Why not?
Is
Why
it-
not? Why not?
okay.
When India is a democratic countries and identity question of identity doesn't really challenge the nation state. In fact, the identity we should assert identity in order to democratize, to deepen democracy.
So
it's
the-
a part of deepening the democracy. So one should talk about identity.
so the education system should also need to change, or
Yeah, education should have a curriculum.
Yeah.
But the curriculum not to necessarily sort of challenging it,
Yeah.
but to remind
yes,
the citizens.
a history
history of
to
it.
teach a history of what has happened.
Yeah, what has happened, what is happening, how do we think about it? What is the best way to think about it? Maybe.
Yes.
I don't know, but that is how we can start off, maybe. That's one way of doing it. But when we started talking about it, maybe that will somehow preserve the Naga consciousness, preserve the identity consciousness, maybe.
And I hope that those people, those who are in power, will also look in these areas, right, in order to frame a curriculum so that our identity will not be lost.
Yes.
Because as of now, I say that it's confined, it's directed only towards preserving the cultures and traditions and these festivals and all these things, but not the political identity. These are not being taught to the younger generations in schools or in higher secondary levels or even in the university. I just wanted to know that when we talk the unique identity, we have been asserting that Nagas, the uniqueness of the Nagas, and many of our nationalist leaders, nationalist workers, they have been asserting unique identity of the Nagas, uniqueness of the Nagas. In this context, how will you perceive, or what is your opinion about that identity? Is that uniqueness applied only to the Nagas when we assert in a very extreme way of uniqueness of the Nagas? So the other ethnic group, we are subjugating them, right? We are making them lower. So in that context, how do you compare the uniqueness of the Nagas and the uniqueness of the other tribes, other ethnic tribes?
The question of uniqueness is something that is not really, the idea of uniqueness is not really so to say, conceptualized. It is still in the process of making, I should say. Because everybody wants to be unique. And the word uniqueness of identity, culture, that's subjective aspects. That is the part of the subjective. There are objective aspects why we are unique. and there is a subjective dimensions of why we are unique. So, but largely Naga's notion of uniqueness is part of the subjective aspects rather than objective aspects. For example, we eat with hands. The Bengali, Bihari, Gujaratis also eat with hands. Right? They wear pants and shirt. We wear pants and shirt. You know, what is there so unique about the Nagas in that sense, in that objective sense? But there is a very genuine sense of uniqueness in terms of emotions and feelings, that we are one in terms of race, culture. There is a similarities, language. Of course, these are also some objective aspects why we are, you know, these are primordial, what do we call it, the primordial notions of uniqueness.
All right, let us also try to know about Article 371A. There was this assurance to the Nagas that identity which are being promised under the 16-point agreement and 371A that will be preserved. But after the abrogations of Article 370 on Jammu and Kashmir, so there is this tendency that this article might also get scrapped. And Article 371A being a temporary arrangement, I say temporary arrangement, is it possible that this article can be abrogated? Or how do you perceive the threat of Article 371A?
Article 371 came at a particular historical time, that is when Naga nationalism was at its height, violence was, and some leaders, they tried to bring Article 371 as a way of, you know, creating a, of course, through that it created a state. But it is also to preserve tradition and custom and so on and so on. So that is one thing that it's there in the public domain. Enough of this is in the public domain. But Article 371 is, as we see, is almost a sort of already agreed 9-point agreement, a kind of the modification of 9-point agreement and so on and so on.
It's part of it.
Yeah, part of it. And it is actually that. So there is no much differences. And for Indian state, it is one way of, you know, is being consistent in their, for them, they think that all of this agreement is consistent. Whereas on the Nagas, other side of the Nagas, they think they take this Article 371 in a very different light. And so, but there are also problems within the 16-point agreement. So like any other previous agreement. So it is not really talking about anything below the ground. It's always talking about the upside the ground.
Upside the ground.
Yeah. You know, but it doesn't talk anything much about the inside the ground. So that's one great problem.
Article 371A or 16-point agreement, there is a surface arrangement.
Yeah, surface arrangement.
But we don't have the ground level arrangement as of now. We have not come to that agreement, right?
Say, for example, Article 371 gives many kinds of autonomy kind of thing. It gives Nagas the right to decide this and that. But we are still, for example, customary law, customary tradition, you will decide about all of this. But then we are going to the court, you know, under this court. So, see, there is an incompatibility with the Article 371 and the
Indian Constitution.
Yeah, constitutions.
Yeah.
So that is where, you know, we see that there are a lot of problems within the Article 371. And as you correctly said, a temporary arrangement. It is not the final kind of thing.
And I don't think that Naga tribunal court are trying to enforce that customary laws and all these things, right? I think just remained in name.
Of course, removing Article 371, just like that kind of Kashmir, there is an apprehension. Yes, the apprehension is also, there is, people has, you know, has right to be apprehensive about it also, because the Indian state is very powerful. But of course, there is a sort of 1/3 majority or 2/3 majority has to agree, you know. So that is one thing. Unless
so
that is
there is this apprehension, like in case if there are certain settlement if there is a certain settlements and say the factions, Naga nationalist factions or groups, if it exists no more, is it possible that that article can be abrogated?
Yeah, if new kinds of arrangement is made, then of course Article 371 maybe the new arrangement will come in relation to Article 371, any kind of settlement, if it is under the Indian Constitution. If any arrangement is coming, that will be a sort of extension of Article 371. As long as it's in the rules. But apart from that, that is the different matters.
Naga people are also facing with multiple issues, like we have the issues of the frontiers Nagaland women, we have the issues of the Naga integrations, and there is also a new problem that's coming up is FMR, free movement regime. So when we have all these complex issues, is there any way out, possibility able to achieve the idea of Naga nation?
We can say that Nagas is already a nation. So Nagas as a nation will always be there as a nation.
But in physical terms, like in reality.
Yes, in a sense of you mean in a sense of nation state. So that means Nagas as a nation state, separate nation state, which means a complete.
But we don't have that arrangement, right, as of now.
Yes, there is no arrangement, but that's what various armed groups are talking about. For example, the framework agreement says is the signatory of the framework agreement is talking about in that line of
so that
thing.
nation state can be a way out, can be a solution.
Yeah, nation state.
Rather than just a nation.
Yeah,
right.
Nation state is already, nation state means those states which are already established nation state. But for example, in India there are many nations. There is not only Naga as a nation. Mizors are also a nation. Nagas are also a nations. Ahoms are also a nations. Bodos are nations. And some people might even claim that the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes are also a nations. Nations without a nation state. So nation is already there. Nation means those people, ethnic groups, and India is a multi-ethnic societies, countries. That's why they adopted a civic project to accommodate everyone. So India is already a nation. Within India, there are different nation states. In fact, India was formed out of 46 princely states. There was no India before British colonialism. There was no India. India was the so-called India was a princely states. So that's how.
In that notions, like there are groups that believe that Naga are already a nation, like in a nations of what you have stated, but there are also another groups that wanted to have a physical nations, right? In reality, separate from Indians and right. So, in that way, is it feasible that this ideology or philosophy can be applied?
Feasible.
Yeah.
Yeah, in one sense it's feasible, one sense it's not feasible. One sense is feasible because many nations, even till 1990s, 90s, 94, 95, some nations are still becoming an independent. For example, East Timor is a typical example which became independent from Malaysian domination. So it became independent recently. I think that is the latest one. But so in that sense, nation state, different nation states, maybe in a sense possible. India got more than 200 years fighting. Nagas only 50, 60 years or 70 years, not even 100 years. Some people say, if we started from 50s, it is not even 100 years. If we start from 18, it's almost 100 years. So Nagas' nationalism struggles is not that far comparing to India from British liberation.
Can it sustain?
Can it sustain? That is a very big challenge because of, as I've said earlier also, because of the neoliberal ideas. That's one thing can it sustained, because because people talk about this internationalization, that in this all of those things is there. So neoliberal ideas coming into and diluting it. So can it sustain is difficult if we think about in terms of that. And basically, Nagas have also become more educated. They have become much more richer enough. And we have a very strong lobby against that that ideas of Nagas independence. There is a very strong apparatus of medias to bureaucracy to ministers to ministers. They're also talking about solving Naga problems, but their patriotism is divided. They're half. They're like having two girlfriends. One is Nagas and one is India. So their patriotism is divided into two. So you see, when it is like this, it makes Naga solution very much complicated, rather than making anything easy. And as I've said, there is a very strong lobby which is opposed to Naga nationalism.
In that context, the earliest philosophy or ideologies, the extremist ideologies, which Ezat Fizo have said that Indians are not Nagas. It's like Nagas are not Indians and Indians are not Nagas, right? So that kind of assertions of that kind of extremist philosophy can be applied in the contemporary, in the 21st century, contemporary times. Do Naga really think in that ways?
Right now, Nagas are not thinking in that ways. I think the majorities have given up the idea of sovereignty. So idea of sovereignty is not in the table at the moment, I think. So there is a time of if it is not in the table, then why are we taking too long? That's the question. That everybody is asking that question. Why it is taking too long? So any kinds of solution is still okay.
So generally, it means that that kind of perspective, consciousness has changed.
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
That Nagas are not Indians and Indians are not Nagas. That has typically changed over a time. Right?
Yes, that is absolutely changed.
Yeah.
There's a paradigm shift in that, so to say.
In many of cultural occasions, like even in the universities or in the college, within Nagaland or outside Nagaland, we see so many Nagas students, when they have cultural functions or any kinds of special occasions, they used to wear the Indian cultural dress, particularly like girls. They prefer wearing saris and Indian traditional attire and these things. So, in that context, I think Nagas are also Indianizations or Indianizing, right? So, do you also agree that, particularly Nagas of Nagaland, are Indianized? How do you perceive that?
See, these are all part of the what people call it as the soft power. The India's soft power. So this is not only in Nagaland, but elsewhere India is trying to export its ideals through this cultural thing, And these are one way of acculturation type. This is in sociology we call this as acculturations.
Okay.
So this is one way of acculturating. So you see, India is trying to build a nation building in a very different ways. In 60s and 70s, the nation building was a very brutal one.
Yes.
Army deployment of which democratic nations have used army against its own people. That's not possible.
Do you regard to that? Do you also think that Nehru have taken a wrong decisions in deploying the militaries in the Naga Hill?
Yeah, of course. Nehru was the prime minister at that point of time. And after the UNU and both of them visited Kohima, this AFSPAS came into being. So there is a popular perceptions that Nehru is the responsible for this. But the entire Indian parliament passes AFSPA in a very few, not even a debate. 2-3 hours of debate and then passed this Armed Force Special Power Act, which was Armed Force Special Power Ordinance to quit India movement in before the India's nationalism. You know, so that colonial legacy continues. So we say that Nehru is responsible, but of course the Indian perception as a whole was Indian intellectuals and Indian state itself, let's say Indian state itself, was responsible for this. But Nehru being the prime minister, there is no other way but to call his name. Or else, if we look at clearly, Nehru has a very sympathetic for the tribals.
Okay, yeah.
In fact, Nehru was very, very sympathetic, and in fact, he employed
In his early conversations with T. Sakri, right? Yeah.
In fact, when NNC was formed in 1946, and then there was a Waka, 19th July 1946, when there was a Waka thing, and they had 3 resolutions. And in all of these resolutions, like autonomy, and Nehru was agreeing with everything what the Nagas was saying.
Even Indira Gandhi.
Indira Gandhi was also agreeing.
Yeah.
Just one thing that the Nehru did not agree, and that is the separate electorate, which Indian peoples have already faced that problems with Ambedkar. Gandhi was fasting to death, and in the Punapek they settled that. So that separate electorate is one thing that Nehru was not very sure about it. In fact, he replied in his letter that he is not very sure about that, but all of them, unity among the Nagas, autonomy, Nehru was indeed very happy.
That means integration was also agreed by the government of India, right?
Integrations of unadministered areas, which is
unadministered area.
presently the part of what was known as the Nifa. Beyond the river Tizu, right now beyond the river Tizus were part of the Nifa. So he was, and at present the northeast Naga Hill Tuingsang areas. So that unadministered area means those people. So to be included within. And of course, eventually that came into being reality in the state formations.
Now, as one problem that the Naga nationalism movement is also facing is because of the probability of disintegrations of the present state of Nagaland into Nagaland and the frontier Nagaland. That issue has also gone up. There is a negotiations that is going on between the UNPO and the government of India, right? If it happens, will it become a stumbling block?
There is one thing that we ourselves do not want to agree that frontier Nagaland question, but that is a typical example in the work of India's deep state.
Intelligence.
India's intelligence work, which is to divide, which is to buy time. This talk is all about buying time.
Okay.
And while buying time, Nagas will be obviously divided. So this Kautilya's policy of Sham, Dam, Danda, and Bhed.
Okay.
We are in the Bhed. That's the Bhed part.
Okay.
The Bhed means the splitting. Sham, reconciliations. Dam is to monetary inducement, which is happening, and Danda is the guns, and the Bhed is this is a typical classical example of the Indian philosophy of split, politics. So this frontier Nagaland is also part of that. That
and
policy.
Nagas are happily going towards it.
Yes, Nagas are happily going for it because we are deeply influenced by the globalizations. So one thing, so that is, and of course, India wants Nagas to take long so that they become more materialistic, and they will have the infighting, over.
I think over a period of time, Nagas have become more materialistic. Today, I wouldn't say nobody, but many Nagas doesn't care about Naga nationalisms, or they rather are against the factionalism, the rising numbers of factionalism.
I wouldn't say that Nagas is wholly responsible for whatever. I mean, Nagas are also responsible, but the very powerful force of the Indian deep states working.
Okay.
Creation of Nagaland state is also part of that. all kinds of agreements that have already taken place is a direct actions of that, direct result of that deep states, which is already working. And what is happening is also, so in this stretch of time, the Indian state is buying time so that India can, Nagas can be divided as much as they want. So after the frustrations that it leads obviously will lead to frustrations. And the symptoms is already coming up, the frustration of symptoms. And one way of, whether it is independent or not, just sign it up. Do it fast. That is a one kind of symptoms of that result.
Okay. Yeah.
So that is how this Naga nationalism is now slowly. So this is a typical, one interesting way, very brilliant way Indian state is trying to tackle with the Nagas. Not with an arms, but in a very indirect means through which maneuvering the Naga issues in a very, very tactical ways, in a very humane ways, so to say. But humane, but not really humane.
Yeah.
So that kind of, so in a very nice way, Indian state is trying to destabilize the very notion of Naga identities and very notion of Naga nationalism itself. So Naga nationalism is certainly dying, dying within this one great apparatus, this opinion shapers, among the opinion shapers. And there is opinion shapers and certain class of people, particularly within the political societies, the Naga identity continue to remain. But within the civil societies, civil organizations, the medias, the politicians, the educationists, all the certain well-off group of people, the notion of identity is becoming out of focus. Or we'll rather say it's becoming meaningless day by day. And the notion of Naga identities only exists within the political societies, which, and of course the various political groups, armed groups and political societies. These exist only, or else the larger majority who, opinion shapers, is finished. So it's one way, it's a very nice way, brilliant way of finishing of Naga nationalism.
And I think the youngsters are slowly and steadily assimilating into Indianizations, Indian cultures, Indian way of life.
Yeah, it's in sociology we call this as a sort of Sanskritization. Food, dress, we try to imitate the upper caste or the other group. This is a kind of Sanskritization. It's very sad when their identity gets Sanskritized.
Yes. But will that outer assimilations change or inner feelings of Naganese that they have? Can that be changed?
Culture is a very important way. Culture is through which we identify ourselves as our particular identity, this identity and that identity. And it is also the culture through which we are, our identity gets lost. So it is the culture is the battleground, is a political battleground, so to say, it is true culture. There is, in a sense, true culture that narratives, counter narratives to Naga identities is being challenged. I mean, it's challenging the Naga identity through culture. Because a culture is a harmless thing, and it is something that we take for granted every day. And this taken for granted is, it's nothing but it's a serious thing. It's a very extraordinary ways in which identity is being forgotten. It's all about, identity is nothing but a memory. And if we don't have a memory, then imagine we will suffer what? What will be the conditions? That's the Nagas situations. Now we are slowly losing our memories. And if people lose memories, then we have seen that kind of examples in different parts of the world. Smaller ethnic groups are being, their identity is lost. Their language has been lost. Their culture is lost. Through assimilations, through assimilationist policies, through religions, even in the Northeast, For example, taking the example of Manipur, there are some groups like who wants to revert back to their original ancestral tribal identity, for example. So there will be a realization among the Nagas, but that is, we don't know when. After centuries and centuries, realization
Or
will
maybe
come.
not.
Or maybe not.
Yeah.
Maybe they will be forgotten. They will lose their memories, means they will be forgotten.
As you have written on the everyday life of the the Naga people, how do you observe? What have you observed? What is your observations of the mundane activities life of the Naga people? Do they have this consciousness about the idea of Naga nationalisms? What do you observe?
See, the idea of Naga nationalism is by and large confined within the high political. Everyday peoples there, everyday ordinary peoples are not really concerned about identity as such. You know, and whatever, so there is an interface between these two.
Okay.
But largely, the notion of identity is lies within the high political group. And it is these high political groups where the ideas of Naga identity, Naga nationalism is getting eroded. Ordinary peoples, what they do is not much about. They are not really concerned about identity.
They are
as such.
carrying out their daily activities.
They don't have that clear-cut distinctions. There is no clear-cut boundaries of identity in the everyday life. The clear-cut boundaries of identities only comes within the high political. And it is these high political, as I've said, are the opinion shapers. And they shape the identity of the everyday as well. But, and so, for example, we sing the national anthem or national song is one way to educate the everyday ordinary people how they should be patriotic about their nations and so on and so on. So it is one way of force, but it's one way of nicely forcing and without taking for granted ways, forcing that national identity, and national identity gets sipped down to the everyday from the high political. So it is the high political that, in a way, decides. Because
the fate of the Nagas.
Yes, and this is the elite groups that churns what should be the Naga identity. It is this elite. It is in the hand of the elites, whether we like it or not. It is there because they are the one who conceptualize, and they are the one who shapes, and they are the one who give direction to what would be the shape of the identities.
Okay, thank you so much. The conversations will never end, but we'll stop here, and we'll hope to have another conversations in future. Okay. Thank you so much for being here, and thank you so much for sharing knowledge, a valuable, priceless knowledge to the viewer. I hope this will help, this will contribute, this will help in understanding the idea of Naga nationalisms, Naga identity, and understanding the perspective of the people. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you.
I'll see you in the next video.